Hollywood's darkest scandal just broke. Robert De Niro, the legend of Taxi Driver, accused of robbing Al Pacino's Park Avenue penthouse. For fans who cherish The Godfather and their epic friendship, this betrayal cuts deep. A cryptic note, a missing watch, and whispers of a bigger conspiracy. What's De Niro hiding? Step into the shadows of New York to uncover the truth. Before we start the video, make yourself some tea and write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and now dive into the video. Al Pacino, the legendary actor whose voice and charisma had captivated the world for decades, became the victim of a brazen robbery. And the most shocking part? The prime suspect was none other than his longtime friend and colleague, Robert De Niro. For older Americans who grew up on films like The Godfather and Raging Bull, the news hit like a bolt of lightning. On social media, where debates about political polarization and economic struggles still simmered, posts about the robbery flooded timelines. How could De Niro do this? Some wrote in comments. It's got to be a mistake, others fumed. But for those who knew the history of their friendship, the story was far more complicated. Al Pacino sat in his spacious yet cozy penthouse on Park Avenue. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park, where the leaves were beginning to turn shades of ochre and crimson. The room smelled of old books, espresso, and the faint aroma of expensive cigars. Black and white photographs from his film career adorned the walls. A still from Serpico, a moment from Dog Day Afternoon, and, of course, a portrait of Michael Corleone, staring at Al with the same cold determination. He held an old script in his hands, its pages yellowed with time. It was an unpublished project he and Robert had worked on back in the 80s. They had dreamed of making something together, not another gangster epic, but a deep drama about friendship, betrayal, and forgiveness. But life had pulled them in different directions. Robert dove into directing, Al focused on theater. Their meetings grew rare, their conversations brief. That morning, Al woke with a sense of unease. The previous evening, he'd received a strange call from Robert. His friend's voice sounded tense, almost nervous. "We need to talk, Al, it's important," he'd said, without explaining why. Al suggested meeting at his favorite cafe on Madison Avenue, but Robert refused. "I'll come to you. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Then he hung up. Al glanced at the clock, 9:45. He rose from his armchair, adjusted his navy sweater, and walked to the window. The street below buzzed with life. Joggers in tracksuits, nannies with strollers, businessmen hurrying to meetings. But something about the familiar scene felt off. Perhaps it was just old age playing tricks on his nerves? At 85, Al was no longer the tireless actor who could shoot scenes all night. But his mind remained sharp, his intuition infallible. The doorbell rang sharply, like a gunshot. Al flinched, but quickly composed himself. He approached the intercom, where Robert De Niro's face appeared on the screen. His features, etched with deep wrinkles, looked grim. He wore a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. "Come in, Bobby," Al said, pressing the button. Robert entered silently. He removed his hat, but kept the coat on. Al noticed his hands trembling, barely, but enough to raise concern. "Coffee? Or something stronger?" Al tried to lighten the mood, but his voice sounded strained. "No, thanks," Robert replied, sitting on the couch. His gaze wandered the room, as if searching for something. "Al, I'm in trouble." Al frowned. In all the years of their friendship, Robert rarely asked for help. Even when his production company crashed in the 90s, he handled it alone. But now, there was something new in his eyes, fear. "What's going on, Bobby? Tell me." Al sat across from him, his dark eyes studying his friend. Robert sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "I owe money. Big money. The people I owe. They don't mess around. They gave me a week. Al, today's the last day." Al felt a tightness in his chest. He knew Robert had been taking on risky projects lately, investing in startups that didn't pan out. But to get to this point? How much? Al asked quietly. $2 million, Robert said, looking away. I thought I could pay it back. But everything went wrong. Al stayed silent, his mind racing. $2 million wasn't just a debt, it was a disaster. He knew Robert wouldn't have come to him unless he'd exhausted every other option. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have figured something out, Al said, trying to keep his frustration in check. I didn't want to drag you into this. Robert stood and paced the room. But I don't know what to do. They're threatening not just me, but my family. Who are they? Al leaned forward, his voice sharper. Robert stopped but didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the coffee table. This is all I can tell you. Read it after I leave. Al glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. Something about Robert's behavior made him uneasy. This wasn't the Bobby he'd shared the screen with in Heat. This was a man cornered. Bobby, we'll fix this. Together, Al said, trying to steer the conversation back to calm. I've got connections. We'll find a way. Robert smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You are always the optimist, Al, but this time it's different. He headed for the door, but paused. I'm sorry it came to this, he said softly, and left. Al sat motionless, staring at the envelope. His heart pounded. He felt something was wrong, but couldn't pinpoint what. Finally, he picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few handwritten lines. Al, if you're reading this, I've already done what I had to. Don't look for me, and don't believe everything you hear. There was no signature. That evening, Al turned on the TV to distract himself. But instead of the usual political debates, a breaking news report flashed across the screen. The anchor, with a grave expression, announced, legendary actor Al Pacino has been the victim of a robbery at his Park Avenue home. The thief stole valuable items, including personal awards. Police suspect Robert De Niro, who was seen near Pacino's residence shortly before the incident. Al felt the blood drain from his face. He grabbed his phone and dialed Robert's number, but it was out of service. A knock came at the door. It was the police. Mr. Pacino, we need to talk, said the detective, holding a photo of Robert. Al nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He recalled the note's words, don't believe everything you hear. What was Robert up to? And why had he dragged Al into it? Manhattan breathed the crisp autumn air as Al Pacino sat in his penthouse, holding a cup of cold coffee. Outside, Central Park was shrouded in fog, and inside, a tense silence hung, broken only by the low hum of the television he hadn't turned off. The screen replayed the robbery story for the third time in an hour. Reporters savored the details. De Niro, a Hollywood icon, accused of a brazen crime against his friend. Al muted the sound, but the words echoed in his mind. The detective, who'd come the previous day, left a card. His name was Edward Keene, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a gaze that had seen too much deceit. Call if you remember anything important, he'd said, but Al sensed Keene had already formed his narrative. To the police, it was simple. Robert De Niro, cornered by debts, robbed his friend to pay off creditors. But Al knew Bobby better than anyone. Beneath the tough guy persona from the Bronx was a man who never betrayed those he considered family. He looked at the note Robert left. Don't believe everything you hear. The words were a riddle Al had to solve. But where to start? The police searched his apartment and found that not only awards, a Golden Globe and a few festival statuettes, were missing, but also an antique watch Al had received from Francis Ford Coppola after filming The Godfather. To Al, these weren't just valuables, they were pieces of his life, memories etched in metal and glass. But why did Robert take them? And why leave a note that only complicated things? Al stood, feeling his joints protest the sudden movement. At 85, he couldn't run around the city like he used to, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He picked up his phone and dialed an old friend, Martin Scorsese. If anyone knew what was happening with Robert, it was Martin, the man who directed them both in their greatest films and remained their mutual friend. Al, you okay? Martin's voice was concerned but warm. "I saw the news. This is absurd." "Martin, I don't know what's going on," Al said quietly but firmly. "Bobby was here yesterday. He said he was in trouble. Debts, some people. And now this. Have you heard anything?" Martin sighed. "Robert's been off lately. He told me about some investments that went south. Said he got mixed up with people who don't play fair. But a robbery? Al, that's not him. Not Bobby. Then who?" Al gripped the phone tighter. "And why did he run?" "I don't know," Martin replied. "But last week, he asked about you. Wanted to know if you still had that watch from Coppola. Said it was something special. I thought he was just reminiscing." Al felt a knot in his chest. The watch. Why was Robert asking about it? It wasn't something you could easily sell, too unique, too recognizable. But if it wasn't about money, then what? "Martin, if you hear from him, tell him I want to talk. No police. Just us." "Okay, Al, but be careful. This story. It smells like trouble." The next day, Al decided to act. He couldn't sit idly by while the media tore their friendship apart. The news was already filled with experts analyzing their relationship, dredging up old rumors of rivalry on set. For older fans who remember their films together, it felt like a betrayal. How could Michael Corleone forgive Fredo after this? People joked on X. But Al wasn't playing by the tabloid script. He put on an old leather jacket, pulled on a cap, and took a cab to Little Italy, the neighborhood where Robert grew up and often returned when he wanted to disappear. Al knew Bobby had old friends there, people who didn't read papers or watch TV, but always had his back. If Robert was hiding, it was likely there. The cab stopped outside Raphael, an old cafe that looked frozen in the 70s. Inside, it smelled of freshly ground coffee, garlic, and warm bread. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with a thick gray beard, cleaning an espresso machine. Al recognized him, Joe, an old pal of Robert's, who'd once been an extra in Taxi Driver. "Joe," Al nodded, sitting at a table by the window. "Al Pacino, damn it," Joe grinned, but his eyes held caution. "What brings you to my corner?" "You know what?" Al took off his cap and set it on the table. "Bobby. He's in trouble, and I want to help." Joe wiped his hands on a rag and came closer. "I haven't seen him, Al, but I heard he's in deep. Some guys from Brooklyn. Not our kind, not Italians. New players, the ones who wear fancy suits and talk about cryptocurrency. They've got him cornered." Al leaned forward. More than cornered, Joe lowered his voice. "They wanted him to pull a job for them. Something big. I don't know the details, but Bobby said no. And then, well, you saw the news." Al's pulse quickened. So the robbery wasn't just a desperate act. It was a move in someone's game. But why choose Al's place? And why the note? "Joe, if he shows up, tell him I'm waiting. At Vesuvio, tomorrow at 8. He knows where." Joe nodded, but his gaze remained wary. "Al, you sure you want to get into this? These guys don't play." "I don't play either," Al replied, his voice calm but steely. That evening, Al returned home and put on an old Frank Sinatra record. "My Way" filled the room, and he let himself sink into memories. He and Robert used to listen to this song after long shoots, sharing a bottle of whiskey and laughing about how far they'd come from New York's rough streets. But now, those memories felt distant, overshadowed by betrayal. He sat at the table and reread the note. Don't believe everything you hear. What was Robert trying to say? That the robbery was staged? Or that someone else was behind it? Al felt the answer was close, but it slipped away like smoke. The next day he went to Vesuvio, a small Italian restaurant they'd loved since the 70s. Inside, it smelled of tomato sauce, basil, and wormwood. Al sat in the corner, ordered a glass of Chianti, and waited. The clock showed 8:15, but Robert didn't show. Instead, a man in a dark suit walked in. Young, with cold eyes and a tattoo peeking from under his cuff. He sat across from Al, without invitation. "Mr. Pacino," he said with a slight accent Al couldn't place. "Your friend left you in a bad spot." Al gripped his glass, but kept his face neutral. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter," the man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What matters is that Robert stole something that belongs to us. And we want it back." "I don't know where he is," Al said, his voice even, though tension coiled inside him. "Maybe," the man leaned closer. "But you can pass him a message. Tell him he has 3 days. Or we come for you." He placed a small photo on the table, Al with his granddaughter, taken last week in the park. Al felt his blood run cold, but showed no reaction. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, his eyes locked on the stranger. "You don't know who you're dealing with." The man laughed and stood. 3 days, Mr. Pacino." When he left, Al sat staring at the photo. He knew he couldn't go to the police, it would only complicate things. But he also knew he wouldn't let himself be intimidated. Robert had pulled him into this game, but Al wasn't playing by anyone else's rules. He picked up his phone and called Martin. "Martin, I need your help. Round up anyone who still remembers the old days. We're finding Bobby, and we're ending this." New York never slept. Even at 3 in the morning, the city hummed. Sirens wailed somewhere, night revelers laughed elsewhere. And in Little Italy, where Al Pacino sat in the cramped back room of an old pizzeria, the air smelled of olive oil, tobacco, and tension. Around the table were people he hadn't seen in years. Martin Scorsese, hunched over an espresso, Frank, Robert's old agent, whose voice rasped from whiskey and cigarettes, and Rosa, Joe's sister from Raphael, who knew everyone in the neighborhood. This was a crew assembled not by Hollywood rules, but by the code of the streets where Al and Robert grew up. Al placed the photo the man from the restaurant had left on the table. His granddaughter, smiling with ice cream in hand, unaware she was being watched. Everyone at the table fell silent, staring at the picture. "They gave me 3 days," Al said, his voice low, but carrying the weight of decades lived in struggle. "But I'm not waiting. We find Bobby. And we figure out what he took." Martin rubbed his temples. "Al, I talked to my people. Robert's been hiding in Brooklyn the last 2 weeks. There's an old apartment above a pool hall on Atlantic Avenue. He's there. But he's not alone." "Who's with him?" Frank asked, his eyes narrowing. "Some guy," Martin replied. "Young with tattoos. They say he's one of those working for these new gangsters. The kind who use laptops instead of guns." Rosa snorted, crossing her arms. "Those aren't new gangsters, Martin. They're old wolves in new skins. I've heard of them. They buy up debts like candy and squeeze people like Robert. If he took something from them, it's not just a watch or a statuette. It's something that could ruin them." Al nodded. He felt the truth was close, but it was like a puzzle scattered across the city. Robert's note, the watch, the robbery, it was all part of a bigger game. And Al had to play his part. "We're going to Brooklyn," he said. "Tonight." Frank shook his head. "Al, you're 85. You can't just barge in there like Sir Pico." "I'm not barging in," Al replied, his eyes glinting. "I'm going to talk. If Bobby's there, he'll listen." Brooklyn greeted them with a cold wind and the salty smell of the bay. The pool hall on Atlantic Avenue looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Faded sign, dim lights, a few drunks loitering outside. Al, in his old jacket and cap, blended in like a local. Martin and Frank stayed in the car, parked around the corner, while Rosa went with Al. Her sharp tongue and neighborhood connections might come in handy. They climbed creaky stairs to the apartment above the hall. The door was ajar, and voices drifted out. Al recognized Robert's, gravelly, tense, but still commanding attention. "I told you I'm not giving it up," Robert was saying. "You know what it means." Another voice, younger, with a hint of mockery, replied. "You're old, Bobby. You think you can play us? We'll find Pacino, and we'll take what's ours." Al's blood pulsed in his temples. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. In the cramped room, littered with empty pizza boxes and beer bottles, stood Robert. His coat hung on a chair, his face pale as a ghost. Across from him sat the man with the neck tattoo, the same one from Vesuvio. Al. Robert froze, his eyes widening. What are you doing here? I came for the truth, Bobby, Al said, his voice calm but carrying an unyielding force. You pulled me into this. Now explain. The man with the tattoo laughed, but there was more nervousness than confidence in it. Oh, this is sweet. A reunion of old stars. But you're too late, Pacino. Your friend stole something that belongs to my bosses. And you're not leaving until we get it back. Rosa, standing behind Al, stepped forward. Kid, you're talking to people who've been through more than you can imagine. Name your price and get out. The man frowned, but Al raised a hand, stopping Rosa. No, he said. We're not paying. And we're not scared. Bobby, tell me. What did you take? Robert looked down, his hands trembling, but he steadied himself. It's not about money, Al, and it's not about your watch. I took a flash drive. It's got evidence. These people, he nodded at the tattooed man, they're tied to big players. Politicians, businessmen, even a few stars. They're laundering money through shell companies. I found out when I invested in their project. They wanted me to stay quiet. But I couldn't. Al felt the pieces falling into place. The robbery was a cover. Robert staged it to buy time, to throw them off. But why not tell the truth? Why didn't you come to me? Al asked, his voice trembling with hurt. I would have helped. Because they were watching you, Robert replied. I couldn't risk it. I thought I could handle it alone. But I was wrong. The tattooed man stood abruptly. Enough talk. Where's the drive? Al turned to him, his eyes flashing. You think you can scare us? Bobby and I have been through things you can't even dream of. You want the drive? Fine. But first, you tell us who's behind you. Or I call some friends in the press. And trust me, they love stories like this. The man blinked, his confidence wavering. He hadn't expected the old actor to be so resolute. Rosa, sensing the moment, pulled out her phone and started recording. Talk, she said, or this goes online in 5 minutes. The man sighed and sat down. He named names, a few businessmen, a senator, even a director Al knew personally. Each word hit like a blow, but Al stayed calm. He knew anger wouldn't help. Only the truth would. The drive's safe, Robert said when the man fell silent. I hid it in my mother's old apartment. But I'm not giving up until I know Al and my family are safe. Al nodded. We'll give it to the police. But not the ones on your boss's payroll. I know people we can trust. The next day, Al and Robert met in Central Park, far from cameras and reporters. The flash drive was handed to Detective Keene, who, despite initial skepticism, proved honest. Al told him everything, but asked to keep their names out of the spotlight. This isn't about fame, he said. It's about justice. The news exploded with headlines. New York money laundering scandal. Politicians and stars under investigation. Al and Robert's names were mentioned only in passing, as victims of a robbery. But for those who knew the truth, they were heroes. Al sat in his apartment, looking out at the park. On the table was the watch from Coppola. Robert had returned it with apologies. They talked like old times, laughing and reminiscing about their youth. But both knew their friendship had changed. It was stronger, but more complex. You risked everything, Al, Robert said before leaving. Why? Because you're my brother, Al replied. And because the truth is worth it. He put on the old Sinatra record and closed his eyes. The scandal hadn't died down, and questions loomed ahead. But for the first time in a long while, Al felt peace. He and Robert had taken a small step, and it was enough to make the world a little better.